Okay, welcome everybody. You may have already heard us chatting away here, but welcome to this session titled Avoiding Trust Gaps in FinTech. For the next 45 minutes, we're going to discuss this topic with a very international set of guests, and I'll quickly introduce them. So first of all, in Singapore, we have Ren, who is the founder at Lightning Social Ventures. Lightning Social Ventures is a B2B2C company that enables financially vulnerable people to receive super fast support, recover from shocks, and build lasting financial resilience. Ren set the company up at lightning fast speed to respond to the challenging pandemic times that we're in. But previously, she was head of product and director of financial inclusion at Railsbank. So welcome, Ren. Thanks for joining us in your evening. Second up, we have Matthias, who is the co-founder at Passbase, which is a B2B company that aim to empower the world with a digital identity system through their identity proofing as a service business. Passbase are building the next generation of digital ID with a focus on privacy and a vision to ensure people are in control of their own data. So thanks for joining us from Berlin, I believe, Matthias. Thirdly, we have Fabian. Fabian is in Belgium, but has a wealth of experience across the financial sector at very senior levels. He now runs his own consulting company where he advises many groups, including the Abu Dhabi Global Market and companies like us at Star. But before that, he was head of innovation and marketing management at Swift for 13 years. So thanks, Fabian. The guys will, I'm sure, tell you much more about their business as we go through the questions. From Star, we have who's the global managing director of FinTech. Star are a global team of product creators. We're 750 people who deliver digital products and services across many sectors, of course, including digital financial services, but also including health and wellness and automotive and mobility. So we bring a very cross-sector lens to this conversation. And we've done that for the past 11 years. So both Jawad and myself are in London. I'm Ed Adamson, Director of Strategy and Insight. And I'll be leading you through the session. Now, it is an interactive session. I can see the chat. I'm relying on you guys in the room to populate that with as many challenging or interesting questions as possible. But to kick you off and to get your mind in gear and tune into this, I've got 5 minutes of some slides that I want to share. So I'm going to set the scene. So avoiding trust gaps in FinTech. I'm not thinking about making money yet. What I want to do first is build trust, said the CEO of Yolt recently. And that was in reaction to a poll they did. 23% of 1,000 respondents thought that open banking was the ability to take a customer's data without consent. And I found this very interesting because I want to talk about a two-way street. And on one side of the street, you have providers who are creating great technology. But on the other side of the street, you have people who need to use that technology and those services, but maybe have a different understanding. And how can we start to resolve those trust tensions? So yes, on one side you have people, on one side you have providers, a very simplistic diagram. But let me illustrate this. So a person may say, well, how do I know that you will manage my hard-earned money well? A provider may say, well, yes, but how do we confirm who you are and what you need? If you give us access to your data and your assets, of course, we'll give you added value and personalized benefits. And of course, they're only examples, but the more that relationship goes on, the more data is created and the richer the relationship becomes. But in any relationship, there are tensions, of course. So we're actually going to dive much deeper into these tensions in another session later on. But at a high level, from a reassurance perspective, as the user, I want control of my data, right? But a provider may say, yes, of course, but how can we convince you or reassure you that we are doing this in a secure and transparent way? What are the systems we have in place? How can people understand them? From a responsibility level, I want to be able to prove to you I'm a responsible guy. I'm good for my money. I'm good, if I'm borrowing, for example. And on a provider side, it's yes, but do you understand the implications of your choice? Maybe we're talking about coaching services that can guide you through this. And of course, that goes down to the personalization level. I'm Ed, I have a family and a mortgage. I want you to talk to me. I want to almost co-create the service I get. On a provider level, it's like, well, yes, okay, but how do we do that without blowing the complexity fuse, if you like, and use data to do so? And of course, the last one of seamlessness is how do we wrap all that into a friction-free experience? We know people demand friction-free experiences. They're used to digital experiences. So how can a provider do that at a high level, highly consistently, in an emotivating way? So with those tensions, there are opportunities to really dial up your service. But to do that, we believe that, first of all, you need to have empathy for what people want. And it's not just end users, but it might be the internal teams that have to use your technology. How are we going to get people to adopt this? Means you have to understand their needs. And then that will allow you to understand what experiences to build that place you in the hearts and minds, or the head and the head rationally and their heart motivatingly, if you like, so they'll adopt and use the service. But then, of course, and deliberately this comes second, is then therefore what technology should we use and how do we deploy that within the context of the experience? Now that experience is the second part here. The CEO of Monzo recently said, trust is built across all touch points, from onboarding to communication. We strive to build and explain products and services in a way that my mum can understand. So we need to be transparent in a language people. So you may have the best technology provider solutions in the world, but unless you're communicating that in an understandable way, arguably that's one of the gaps we will talk about. And so, well, that's the question of, well, which levers do we have to pull then if we want to make that consumer experience understandable? Well, think about this as a toolbox. On one level, you have brands, softer visual language, tone of voice tools, things that fintechs are great about. They're great at doing. But then you have the ecosystem of which services you're going to create. You have therefore the features in those services and how you're going to deliver them with great design. And then, of course, you have other levers that fuel all that, like data, as we've discussed, in the security, how you're compliant. So there are many levers to pull and lots of opportunities to create advantage, if you like, competitive advantage with those tensions. But you then have to consider which ones do I pull? And therefore you have to consider the context. And this was a quote from a Fiserv report recently that says, customer expectations are really high, and 82% of respondents said they expect every digital experience to be equal to or better than what they receive from other technology providers. So those providers may be your direct competitors, but they were referring to the Netflix, the Apple, the Amazon of the world, where people are used to experiences that are seamless, personalized, reassure them every day. So you have to, I would say, be inspired by those, not threatened, because we all know the cost of not doing this. The cost is that, customers are used to effortless, friction-free digital services. They resent lengthy forms, paperwork, and waiting around during onboarding. As a result, across the UK and EU, the application abandonment rate in financial services is 38%. So if you don't get this right from the offset, you may never get started, according to that statistic. So we've understood the tensions. We know there's lots of levers we can pull, and we also know that we have to do this in context of of a digital experience. So this brings me on to the real depth of the discussion about avoiding gaps. At a very high level, if you imagine this to be the playing field we're talking about, from people at one side and all the providers at the other, there are gaps that appear in between, we would say. So there's an experience, a product, and an ecosystem gap. Working backwards, in the ecosystem, are you working with the best technology that can help you build trust? So we're going to talk, obviously, Passbase have got a great point of view on that from a digital ID perspective. But there are others, right? How do we make sure you're choosing the right technology providers that can build trust for your sector or your service? Then how are you wrapping that into the product? How are you using data? How is open banking going to show up in there? What features do you need to offer that people need to, that really they need? And then finally, the last hurdle, if you like, would be the experiential level. Are people really going to resonate with this? Is that a marketing perspective, a brand level? How are you going to deliver it? And this is where I think I'd like to go to maybe Ren, maybe you first, if you don't mind. You obviously sit slightly more to the left of this chart, right? And your solution leverages open banking to verify people so that check they've got a genuine need for support. But where did you start in terms of this? Would you start with the people and challenging that experience gap, or would you look at the ecosystem first?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think these are all important components to consider. I think how we always start to think about it is putting the user at the center. So to your point earlier about empathy, and what we want to do is first understand our users, their needs, and what concerns there might be. So that tends to start from the experience side of things. Once we understand that, then we can design the products and services or the features to fit that, and make sure we find the right partners in the ecosystem to be able to deliver on it. I think for a bit of context, at Lightning Social Ventures, we are working with people who are very financially vulnerable, and a huge portion of them have been hit by fraud before. So just anecdotally, out of say 10 users that we speak to, actually about 5 of them would have had some experience with fraud, either directly or through close members of their family. So I think what that means is the hurdle we need to sort of surpass is higher because they've been burnt before, they're concerned about financial services, and open banking is often something that's quite new for them. So we need to make sure that they have an experience that takes them all the way from being at the edge of that gap to saying, actually, I can see the benefits of this, and that's worth the risk I'm taking by stepping over the trust gap.
Well, yeah, so you're right at the edge of where trust is hypersensitive of people that have been caught out before, right? And especially in pandemic times where we're all looking for a bit more trust and reassurance generally. Very interesting. So Matthias, if I came to you being kind of more at the other end of the spectrum, you know, as a provider of APIs and solutions, how do you make sure that you're looking at not, you know, the end user and also therefore the businesses and what they need? You've got quite a few kings to please, right?
Yeah, and especially since I think like roughly 50% of our client base is like they are like financial services, and then like the rest is like anything from marketplaces, mobility providers, gig economy, all of that. And of course, it's like a tough one to to please all of them, since as you can imagine, a lot of our financial services clients, they ask us for like deeper integrations like into like anti-money laundering checks, compliance, and like more like regulatory like features that help them to somewhat identify like the bad actors that try to onboard on their service. And yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, I can tell you that just like from like a feature prioritization approach, we work like hand in hand with some of like our key clients, and somewhat like really like develop the features that they ask us. And it's of course like a challenging one to identify who are those clients that you wanna work with, especially if you are like a startup. You always have somewhat the challenge to signal trust to like any of your clients. And as if you imagine, if you're like a startup, it's very hard to kind of like sell from day one to a lot of these, let's say more like older financial institutions. But even like if you like in your first year, it's almost impossible to like sell to Revolut or one of the big neobanks. So you kind of like need to, from a provider perspective, also build up the trust that you can like serve those clients, and that you have like all the requirements and features built out for them.
And how do you do that then as a startup? You know, is it about understanding their needs.
Yeah, you start small. So like I think the first few clients that we got, they were like, when we were like just like a founding team plus like a couple of engineers, we kind of like met our first few clients in like an incubator, and they were like similar like teams, like just the founding team and like a few members, usually even like pre-launch, and then you just like hand in hand develop your first MVP with them, then you add a feature here and there, and then at some point in time your product meets the requirements for like the next big company, and then you somewhat market. And this is very much like where you are like finding Passbase right now. So we're like a little bit more than 2 years. So we have like now more than 100 clients, and we started small, and we're now like moving up, and like now like more and more every month, like larger companies are landing in our CRM, and we're working along them. And now at some point in time, we're now thinking about, okay, what are these enterprise features that they need to kind of like build up trust on their end, or like kind of like fill their like compliance needs.
Great. So Fabian, how about if we kind of got both ends of the spectrum here, but you've obviously worked across many of this. How would you give a perspective on this? Did it with you, and do you have a particular, do you think anyone is a particular challenge?
Well, I think there's lots of talk about being a platform, right? I think everybody wants to be a platform today. If you talk to all banks and you look at their annual report, there will be a sentence that says that we want to be the platform whereby our customers can access financial services and other services. The thing is, you don't become a platform because you want to be a platform. You become a platform because people trust you to be a platform, right? Or people use you as a platform. And I think the biggest asset of a platform is that people first find all they want on that platform, that the experience is like you mentioned, Ed, is a great experience, but also because platforms are based on data, on huge tons of data, that those platforms don't misuse the data. And I think, to me, the biggest proof that the trust is there on the platform is when there is no discussion about what are you doing with my data. And to me, one of the biggest discussion that there is today, and it's not a technology discussion, is if you want to create trust, you need to make sure that data is used for a purpose that is accepted by the users of the platform, or at least known. If you don't have that, then your platform will not succeed in a way, or become too big and then be scrutinized by regulators at one point.
I totally agree actually with you, Fabian, here on this. Since this is even like a question that we have to like constantly kind of like answer to like our clients, especially if you're like a young startup. I mean, think about it. We are like, at least Passbase, my company, deals with like the most sensitive data about that the human has, which is like to one extent like his true identity. And like if you just look by the numbers over the last couple of years, identity fraud and just like in general like crimes and fraud related to like stealing someone's identity is just like on the rise. And this is why on the one side we need to kind of like convey the trust to the businesses. Hey, we can protect this like very sensitive data of your users. But in the end, still, if you're looking here on like on the very left side, on the people side, our product needs to also like send the message to the end user. Hey, even if they see, okay, this neobank is now working with Passbase on capturing the identity data, I can trust Passbase, and it looks and feels like if I'm onboarding on this app, and it doesn't feel like I'm now in like a complete different service, because then we're exactly like at the 38% dropout rate, where people are just like, I'd rather not onboard here. Like I don't really know what they're doing with my data.
I think Ed, one thing I can maybe add on the ecosystem side. So working previously with the global SIs, and where the challenge comes from tier 1, tier 2 banks to build a platform for them. And these platforms could be building a digital ID or with a KYC or so onboarding. And normally with them, tier 1, tier 2 banks would love to work with the fintechs, would love to bring new and upcoming companies. The challenge comes in when for GSIs, for global system integrators, that they don't have enough data points on those fintechs to prove that they have delivered it in some way, and what are their rate of success somewhere. And therefore, they cannot just then verify to the end clients, which are the very demanding tier 1, tier 2 banks, Barclays, HSBC, and you name it, that they have done a similar delivery or building a similar ecosystem 10 times before. And reality is that they don't even have internal skills sometimes to understand and deploy those skills. So, and then the trust is again, so GSI can't trust the fintech providers. They have to also be very credible toward the end clients, which are the tier 1, tier 2 banks, insurance companies. And what happened normally, they start working on some sandboxing environment, like, okay, let's test what happens. And those sandboxing usually fail because they fail to involve, on your left-hand side of a gram is the actual customer and the experience from people. They run in a very closed loop environment where nobody sees them, what's actually gonna do for the clients there. So trust is very important for global SIs who are working with the large banks and for the fintech and all of them's ecosystem to somehow create this trust internally in order to go externally as well.
Maybe if I can build quickly on that, and I work with startup, and I know the pain of entering the procurement process of a bank, right? For when you want to sell your products, and they, to your point, Jawad, they will ask you for tons of data. You will do 10 proof of concept before you can talk to the right person. But I think for identity, startup identity, or anything that has to do with data, there are ways to accelerate this procurement process if there were more collaboration across banks and possibly with public authorities as well, to kind of label solutions, right, that are with a certain number of criteria. These are the good solution. It's proven that it's good. And that should make it easier for startup also to go through those procurement process, including public procurement process, because there's a lot of energy and time that is being wasted in those procurement process for solutions that are just necessary as we speak, and that that bank cannot create themselves anyway.
Right, so that banks can't create themselves. That's what you're saying. So they exist out there. Are you saying
the last thing you want is is that each bank has its own identity management system, right, that is completely different, right? That's yeah. So
it's almost, I think what I heard was like when you said label, you mean it's almost accredited. So if I'm the guy, if I'm represent the people, you know, I understand that it's been proven. I could trust it because it's got an accreditation, right?
And including the ethical aspect of managing data, like Ren and Matt mentioned.
Yeah, because Ren, a lot of the guys have talked about, like Fabian's talking about making sure people see it's accredited, so it's easier for them to adopt, and also the data needs to be accepted by the users. The way you're using data needs to be accepted by them. So how? If you're talking to people who are particularly vulnerable, how do you convince them that it's all okay?
It's a really good question. Just quickly on Fabian's point about sort of working together and collaborating on accreditation, there's actually quite an interesting example where we've seen that happening more in the charitable grant giving space, where you have funders also getting together to think about how they might due diligence other organizations that they give grants to. So just as Fabian said, there's a lot of replication in the whole procurement or due diligence process that can be bypassed with suitable collaboration. And then it's about sort of balancing that between making sure you still handle the data safely and give the right privacy considerations across the value chain. I think when we're talking about then the very vulnerable users, what we think about is conveying a few things. One is, what is the benefit of using a new service that they've not seen before? So for example, in our case, what we can say is it's going to take you a few minutes to share the exact same information that you would need to by printing out your bank statements or uploading them into a portal anyway. And once they figure that out, it's like, oh, okay, there is a benefit. There's something in there for me. Then next, it's thinking about how do we reduce the risk and the discomfort they might see. I think to Matthias's point about switching providers and sort of having a completely different experience. So we want to think about how we build or work with partners that have a trusted brand, like the charities, for example. They are well known, they are trusted by the users, and it makes absolute sense to build that into the journey with them rather than sort of trying to establish a brand new relationship with the end user where a new startup. And I think thirdly, then it's thinking about how we build in elements of trust and security. So when we ask some of the users, what do you look for when you trust the products? Some of these are actually really small things that make a difference, like the padlock sign that conveys security, having a secure self-link, making sure there are no strange typos in the site that makes it sound like you have a fraudulent product. So these are small things that are quite easily addressable and together provide that whole experience for the user.
Yeah, no, I love the fact you've gone from collaborations, you know, with other industries right down to that padlock symbol. I remember my Santander application when I launch it. There's a padlock symbol, and it makes me feel like someone's at least robotically looking at that security. I feel reassured. So the design to the collaboration is really, it's a big scale of things you can apply. Just on the point here, Paul Loberman's popped a question in the chat here that says, Fabian, really agreeing with your point of view, not famous with customers. Does there need to be co-branding of solutions with other trusted partners to make them more trusted as the provider? So, I mean, I guess Ren touched on that by working with established charities, I think you said, Ren, but what do you think, Fabian? Is there, or even Matthias, is there a way of like you're collaborating or co-branding even, I think is the suggestion.
Yeah. So like we once chatted, I think this was like early in the year, with like a big gig economy online marketplace as a potential client. And we didn't win that deal in the end, simply due to the fact that they decided to go with like a more established provider, actually from the UK, also providing similar identity services. And this is like going a little bit into the saying that you probably heard, nobody ever got fired for buying IBM. So right. So for like a lot of the larger deals that if you just buy basically the established brand, then you're on the safe side because they have proven out that they can serve the volume. They have all the security certifications and all of that. And as a startup, you need to signal that you can serve those volumes, or your product is so robust and you have the uptime and you have all the security requirements. And it's just much harder from a provider standpoint to also prove, hey, you're new in the market, but you don't worry, I got this basically. And this is only what you can build up over time, honestly. And as I said earlier, start small, move up market, and then after a couple of years you'll win those deals.
Yeah.
And maybe to build upon that and to Paul's question, I think if you look at platforms, to me there are 3 levels of trust, right? And you can combine them like Lego blocks. There is the trust of being the most customer intimate company, and you know the customers because you have lots of data about them, because you forefront them, and it's kind of the portal stuff. Then you have the second layer is the products that you build, and they are trusted product, right? And you put those products onto that portal, onto that platform. That's the second layer. And the third layer is, it never fails, it's the layer of operations, of resilience, and I can trust that platform will always work. So if you look at why banks sometimes are a bit worried about platform, is because the customer intimate block, they have it, but many others have it. Your favorite retailer has your trust, probably. The product leadership, banks have that for financial services, but not beyond that. And there are other companies that come with very innovative financial products as well. And then the operation side, well, most banks tend to use technology providers and outsource that to that. So they are kind of squeezed between those layers of trust where they need to find their way. So to come back to Paul's question, yes, you should partner as a marketplace with other trusted brands, and that's why Amazon is offering health product now, which they didn't do that much in the past, but because of the pandemic, they do that, and people trust that, but they don't provide the health product themselves, obviously.
Yes.
I think at one actual examples to add, like in the software or platform side, Salesforce, for example, is a trusted brand, and it's not only trust; it's well integrated in the large companies already. And if your product has the verified adaptability to connect with those platforms, it could be Oracle, Microsoft, or anything which has established trust. And I'm going more in the technology side of things. Then it's become trusted when you actually have a validated piece of information that you can be plugged into those established ones. Not only they give you trust, also give you easy access to procurement because you're part of a current platform, and you can be plugged in there. And so you can actually get the access to data on one platform and create a quick value for bank insurance or whoever we're working with. So I agree with Paul, having a reliable partner or branding. One example is, I think Velocity partnering with Salesforce now, they can actually issue the insurance code by simply plugging into the adapter with them.
Yeah, I was going to ask about the cross-sector stuff. I know we talked about those being setting the bar, right? But not to sound slightly obsessed with the current challenge of the pandemic times, but Matthias, from your side, do you see the last year, I guess, or certainly the last eight, 9 months, as something that's going to fuel your business, fuel the need for more trust because of the questions people are asking? Or do you see it almost hindering people in terms of how, like setting us back in terms of trust?
Yeah, so, I mean, on the one side, I can at least speak for like a service provider like us and working in that digital onboarding sector. And I imagine that like a lot of these providers in digital banking, payments, and all these sectors, they had similar tailwinds like we had in the last couple of months. So we saw like a crazy adoption rate from our technology, and like we grew this year more than 10x. So what I still believe in, I think we also saw that also like in just like if we're talking about fraud, this is also on the rise, and probably like Ren can like speak more about that than I do. I mean, we see it also like on our end, but if I just think in the US where I usually live, there was like so much fraud in relation to the stimulus bill and like people trying to illegally obtain money from people in need, which is like on the one side like a very sad part that in such a time where it's like so much pain and sadness and actually people help. Fraudsters saw that and described it as this is the heist of the decade, more or less, where they got access to money. And it's always a balance, like it's always it's a challenge, basically, like a cat and mice game where like we providers, we need to stay on top of like state-of-the-art technology to detect this type of fraud, and the criminals, they're always trying to find ways to like invent new ways of like unfortunately tricking people into becoming victim of, is it identity fraud in the case of like this money which was in the US, but we also saw that I'm as you said, I'm from Germany. We also saw the same type of criminal behavior in Germany, where they tried to get government support for COVID relief. It's sad,
I guess. But I don't know. I'm rather optimistic and hope it makes us stronger in the long run, right? In terms of, but Ren, I guess you rely on that. You rely on that the people you choose to partner with to make you stronger, right? That they are on top of it, that the APIs you do integrate are constantly updated. You rely on them. You trust them to make it resilient for you. Is that right?
Yeah, Yeah, it's a really tricky situation, just as Matthias was saying, because the sort of scale and speed of demand that's placed on providers to support people with the right benefits and support is huge. So, charities, government providers are kind of facing at least a triple increase in the number of applications, and sort of then they have to make a choice often without the right technology between supporting as many people as possible and also being safe and making sure they are able to catch the flow that happens. So what we do try to do is make it as easy as possible for them. We don't build all the technology ourselves, so we would be working with providers like open banking providers and the future ID verification providers as well that can help to provide the underlying data, and that helps us or help our partners to make the right decisions. So I think over time, that's something that's really interesting and can improve has potential not just to mitigate risk, but even to help us think about the way we make decisions and make that even more intelligent. So there's huge amounts of potential there, but it does come with the risk that we both mentioned.
Yeah, I know that. I know you're obviously working at Railsbank before Lightning Social Ventures, but if you're setting out to build a new product, how do you decide what to build? By even, I guess, if you have that luxury or partner with, is there a slight chain of thought that affects that based around trust, I guess?
Yeah, the build versus buy question always a good one, because I think from an ideal perspective, if you had unlimited time and limited resources, it's great to be able to build everything, because then you have full control over the customer experience and the user experience, at the same time that nobody has unlimited time and resources. So it's very much about finding who are the right providers that you can trust to do the right thing. And I guess where there are providers of specialized technology that have already built what you need, it doesn't make sense to replicate it and then build everything all over again. So when looking at, I guess, providers that we partner with, we typically look at a few things: the actual product and feature set, so the coverage, the experience that comes with it, reliability, to Fabienne's point about making sure that we can rely on them to stay up as much as possible, and also sort of the reputation and overall credibility of that. So I guess for us it's interesting, because on one side we are evaluating partners by those metrics. On the other hand, then we are working with other partners like the charities that probably look at us the same way and think, can you trust this fintech startup to be supporting us and the very valuable users that we work with?
So I guess collaboration between startups is a really good breeding ground to build trust. So you can go with proof cases, and rather than maybe, as Matthias said, I don't know if this is what you meant exactly, Matthias, but starting small, working with people, I guess, like Ren, to help prove out the technology even more. Is that the case? That kind of collaboration?
Yeah, exactly. This is exactly what we've done in the early days. Basically, working with other startups like Ren, really getting their needs, building the MVP, and then working hand in hand. Yeah.
Hey, Fabian, going forwards, put in a bit of a, so I've talked about where we are. Going forwards, do you see any, I know we work together on things like ISO 20022, for example, right? Messaging standards and things. And I'm proud I got that in the conversation. But do you see that or anything else helping fuel trust?
I come from a background of working in market infrastructures. I work at Swift, like you mentioned. I work at others like Euroclear and Clearstream and things like that. So these are companies that are used by their members, in that case banks, to exchange data among each other. London Stock Exchange is a similar construct. But if you look at those companies, all of them today and since a while and in the future will make more money in selling data than in doing their core business of transporting payments or facilitating trades in equities. And so it means that comes with a new responsibility as well, right? If their business is shifting from enabling business to selling data, That is a new trust that needs to be there, and it's in the technology, it's in the standards, like the transparency of those data. And it can become very boring very quickly about those taxonomies, but that needs to be there. And also maybe a point that I wanted to make. I know the time is flying out, but there are new. If you take like machine learning, artificial intelligence, this is of course the tools you need to crush that data. You cannot crush the data as a human being anymore. Those things provide output, recommendation, credit scoring, all kind of fraud, positive or false positive, and things like that. The more you will have those tools that manipulate data, the more important it will be for people to make sure that people understand what those tools do. And specifically for machine learning, I'm a big advocate of having guidelines so that people can look into the ways those algorithms are built and make sure that they do not create biases in terms of what they recommend, because that's to me a crisis in that it will happen if people don't have a good view. I mean regulators, but you and me, on the way those things are being built. And authentic, transparent, and ethical AI is a big topic for me in the coming months and years.
Quickly, I know we have 1 minute. We at the Star, we're the product creator, and we have seen a lot of clients who are building products, and these products are not just one product. I mean, no product is island anymore, because we are integrating several APIs coming from open banking, coming from digital ID. And for us to build a product, it's very important to trust the APIs we're getting. It's not only about trust for the end customer building a good CX, it's really building those API trust in a platform and then delivering a product which customer can use and see as well. So it's it's end-to-end journey for this sense.
Yeah. So you're right. We do have about 3 minutes. So I'm going to try and summarize what I think we've said, and then I'm going to look at each of those gaps. So I think what we said in the ecosystem gap was about, as Matthias said, starting small, kind of collapsing down, and then working to expand your offer, maybe through partnerships and collaborations, maybe with smaller companies to start with, but that can build that reputation. So when you walk in the room, you have proof points and people know your name, right? Then if you go to the product side, product gap, if you like, ideally, you use accredited solutions. We talked about co-branding them that are robust, resilient, and scalable. But they need to be constantly managed. So as Ren said, it's relying on the providers to make sure that they are cutting edge and resilient and transparent. If we're talking about AI and ML, managed well, as Fabian said. And then from an experience level, I think Ren put it. There was like 3 things, make sure the benefits are clear of why this new service, this new product, or this new company are right for you. What are you going to deliver? Designing the details. We talked about the padlock, but the language, going back to Monzo, make it transparent and understanding. And then have that association by reputation. They feel like they're in good company that they can trust. Would you guys want to add anything to that I missed? Oh, are we feeling that wraps it up? Yeah.
Nicely said.
Everyone's been very polite with 30 seconds to go. So all I'm going to say, guys, is look, thanks for your time. With Matthias often living in the US, we have had a cross the map team here. Ren, thanks for your time and your evening. Fabian and Matthias and Jawad, thank you. We'll get back to any questions that we missed, but if you want to hear more on trust tensions, please join us on the main stage at 1:50 UK time, where we're going to dive deeper into resolving those tensions I mentioned at the start with MasterCard and Yaply. But yeah, I've been Ed Adamson at Star. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Ed. Thanks everyone.
Cheers.
Yeah.